up until that point, it was so different. It, felt like a different kind of vibe that we get from a lot of vampire films. I was hoping they weren't going to go that route.
And just how gory it is, they don't hold back with that at all. We said it ourselves, it kind of feels like there was supposed to be maybe a bigger name in that role. Like maybe they had floated a couple people and they couldn't get them.
Hear a voice off screen, and you never see an actual face. You just know that that's Dracula in there.
Good evening, campers, dreamers, and babysitters. And yes, we are here with a little treat. As usual, we have decided to sit down and discuss some spoilers for one of the big horror films of the week. And this week's a pretty big one, I gotta say. I think a lot of people have been eagerly anticipating this. It seems to be doing really well at the box office. And that film is Abigail, which, we got our review up now. And we got to say we were pretty surprised with how we felt about this one coming out of it. We were, pretty middle of the road on it, I got to say. We did kind of an explanation on that at the start of our spoiler-free review. But, I mean, I think it's justified. The current state of vampire films, especially of the last, 10 years or so, it's very hit or miss. And I got to say there's a lot more misses than hits. And just a lot more takes that just aren't really what we're looking for in a vampire film. And while I think Abigail is good, and it really does bring a lot of that fun and ferociousness back to it, there is still kind of a few elements in here that I think we could have improved on. But we're going to get into all of that. So Luke, tell me a little bit your first impressions, coming right out of the gate, Abigail.
You mean like after or prior?
Oh yeah, after. You could either or. Prior,
Come on,
after.
Dylan, give me some sort of guy. No, I'm kidding. Going into this one, we covered it a couple times. I think we did the trailer reaction to it, and I wasn't really sold on it. And I think maybe it was a little bit of a sour taste from the Scream franchise because Ready or Not, I'm a big fan of,
Yeah.
it has a unique voice to it. So Abigail, when this was announced, I was hoping for something a little more unique, and then we got the trailer, and it seemed to really just fit in line with a lot of films we had been seeing. So, I think that one did leave a sour taste in my mouth. I did go into this one not necessarily overly negative, but more hesitant than anything. I know when we did the live stream, was it you who brought up that Cody Leach had, compared this to the Lost
Yeah, on Monday there were some it was over the weekend for the Overlook. I think it was actually the week before. That Cody Leach and Sean Chandler and a couple other people who went to the Overlook Film Festival were saying that Abigail's like the best vampire movie since Lost Boys and Fright Night and all this other stuff. It really harkens back to the fun nature of vampire films.
And I gotta say, my ears perked up with that because those are big words when you're talking vampire flicks and you're throwing out Lost Boys. And I didn't know necessarily if that was a direct comparison or just kind of vibing with the Lost Boys.
It's a dangerous game. It really, when you compare it to stuff like that, it's rough.
Yeah, either way, words can get twisted around. So I went into this one, thinking maybe this one was going to be rather interesting. And I gotta say, from the opening, it did have me hooked. I love the setup here. With Abigail dancing, and we already know kind of that hook of what's going to be going on, and that idea. There is a Tales of Halloween. I don't know if you've seen it. It's an anthology film that came out a few years ago, and they kind of have that. It's a little story of I think it's a boy who gets kidnapped and turns out to be some sort of monster after a certain time, I believe it is. Kidnappers regretting that they kidnapped a monster. So I had seen that idea presented to me in a couple different iterations, so I wasn't necessarily overly excited about it. But I gotta say, opening this thing up and really just being bombarded with the world that Radio Silence is setting, I was really hooked going into this one. I gotta say, it did maintain for the most part my intrigue and interest throughout, with just the casting, some of the kills, things like that. There are a few gripes, but overall I was really happy with this one when we walked out of the theater.
Yeah, I mean, I was also in that same boat with you. I think this is one of the a rare time because Luke and I are very strange when it comes to kind of our mainstream, I guess, horror films, because like either it seems like we're completely on board with each other or one of us is on the opposite side of the other. It seems like one of us is a little more positive. Barbarian's a great example. Luke was very intrigued by that trailer. I was very much like, this just seems like it's going to be boring and it's just going to be predictable. Ended up being our favorite film of the year. And there's a few more in there. Like, I can't name them all, but this is one of those where we just kind of were both in the same boat of like, I don't know, like we like Ready or Not. We're both fans of that. I was a very late adopter of that one. But I got to say that movie impressed the hell out of me. And then the Scream franchise, it's been very, very bland, in my opinion. These last two outings where they have great moments, but then they just don't hit for me. So I was worried a little bit going into this. The news of them tackling a vampire film, especially because, again, I got to go back and say it. All the articles that we read from Deadline and Bloody Disgusting were all pinning this as a, quote, Universal Monsters vampire film. So I had expectations. And that trailer, like you said, it really left me on the hook of just like, this is not really what I was hoping for. But damn, I had a lot of fun with this movie. I thought that there was a lot of really inventive stuff in here. Just to rattle off a couple of the things we couldn't say in our review necessarily, but the elements that I thought were a blast were how the vampires die and just how gory it is. They don't hold back with that at all. My favorite part in there is definitely when Abigail loses her hand and you see it start to reform right away. What a wonderful practical effect. And, I got to say, for a film that does rely on CG a good bit, they do a really good job of mixing the CG and the practical effects here. I really felt like there were only a handful of sequences that were completely necessary, but like that I was like, okay, it's clearly CGI. They actually did a really good job blending it together.
Yeah. I was really surprised at the level of gore, because I didn't know exactly what we were going to get, if they're going to go full board or it was just going to be a little modest amount. I do love the way the vampires die as well, this giant explosion. It's kind of a mixing that over the topness with the gore and the humor, but I think it really does work. In going into the film itself, I was so impressed with the actual storytelling aspects of it. I will say one of the parts that had me is once we get to the mansion and Melissa Barrero's character is kind of sitting there and they do the bit of, Angus Cloud is saying, he can read people really well. And Melissa Barrero is like, well, I can pick everyone out. She kind of does this. Dan Stevens gives her $100 to say, what am I? And she instantly picks out that he's a cop. And you can see him almost deflate because I think, his character's meant to be the smartest man in the room. And then as soon as he knows that she's, got a tail on him, he is instantly deflated. And then Kevin Durant's excitedness to be like, do me next and let's see how much you can get right. I just absolutely love that bit. I think going around the room and kind of her showing off that she can really read people, and then that kind of callback a little bit later with Abigail, which necessarily was a little bit of a gripe for me, where I don't know necessarily if we needed that long exposition dump, or maybe we could have had less people without this kind of motivation of, I'm doing this for my father. I thought necessarily didn't overall work for me, but I understand why you need it. But it just felt like the performances were so strong, and that I just always go back to the cast really drives a lot of this film.
I agree. The cast is honestly, I think we said it in our spoiler review. It was, for me, it was the best part. And that's big, comparing it to just being a monster film, like a vampire film. It's like when you can walk out and say the cast was better than the vampires, which is not to say the vampires were bad.
No,
but like
that's the point here. It delivers on the gore, it delivers on the vampires, and we're still talking about the cast. It just is, the cast is just that good.
I know. And really, like, if we want to kind of dive into some of those cast members and just some of the parts we loved, I will start with Angus Cloud because unfortunately he is someone who's not with us anymore. They do have a very heartfelt message at the end of the film for him.
I love that
dedicated
graphic.
to it.
I figured we would get something small like for
Mhm.
Angus or something like that, but they do this like little nifty graphic, which I wasn't really expecting. It's just so well done, and it's somber. I watched Your Lucky Day thinking That's gonna, that is one of his last films. And then Abigail, I believe. I don't know if there's anything else coming out, but I think this was it. So, it's just one of those somber elements of, knowing that graphic is going to be coming up, but it was so well done, so beautiful.
Yeah, because I believe that's one of the pieces that was floating around was how when they completed his work on Abigail, it was like I think a week, maybe 2 weeks before his untimely demise, and yeah, it was really tragic. And again, like I said in our spoiler-free review, I don't have a lot of experience with him. I didn't get a chance to see Your Lucky Day just yet. We had to split the duty on that, and I have not watched a lot of Euphoria. I've seen pieces and parts of it, so I didn't know what kind of a performance I was going to get from him. And I got to say, I wasn't too familiar with him as an actor. So when you had filled me in, because seeing his performance here and seeing the stuff that I have seen in Euphoria, I remember kind of walking in there saying I was expecting maybe a bit of a different twist, but then you explained to me about that kind of being his shtick and that he has a head injury that gives him kind of that dialect and stuff. So I was just like, wow, that's I didn't know any of that going into this. And so, reflecting on it and going back into it, it's kind of like I was able to enjoy his character even more now, knowing that it's like, okay, it's not like an issue with range. It's not like he's just playing the same character over and over again. It's like that's just something that he lived with. And I thought that was super intriguing. And it really made me settle into his character so much more because, like, it was tough for me. Because, like, again, it was like, as a, I don't consider myself a critic necessarily, but like sitting there, if I had to be critical about something, it's kind of like when you have actors who just kind of do the same thing every time. I was kind of like, like I was expecting a lot from this considering how much people love him. But now that I know that it's one of those things where it was just like, okay, I can settle in because there were a lot of moments with him that I loved. Like, again, I talk about him during that conversation that you just said, where he's rolling around on the bike around that, like just giving his speech. I love his getaway driving scene when he pulls up next to the truck. I totally didn't see that coming. I thought at first maybe he was like double crossing them or something because he just wasn't listening to them. And then when he did that, I was like, that's fucking cool. That's like some Baby Driver-esque stuff. And I really appreciated his character as a whole. And it is unfortunate to see that he dies so early in the film because I really like the dynamic he brought to the group. Because it's like he's that comic relief, but he also, you could tell, had a little bit of that heart to him. And I was just like, I was really bought in after a while.
And that's such the charm of Angus Cloud in general. You have to look up his story. I know bits and pieces, but I don't know it verbatim. So hopefully I'm not, speaking at a turn here. But he wasn't an actor at all. He was a production assistant, I believe. And I think it may have been I don't know if it was for Euphoria or something else, but someone asked him if he wanted to try acting. And he just said, sure. And then the rest is history in terms of him getting into acting. So it's funny that they had that idea, that discussion of not being a professional, because Angus Cloud, the person, was in a room full of, actors. And, it's just him kind of being in the right place and delivering on this charm, because that his character from Euphoria, even in Your Lucky Day, I feel he has this exuding charm that will just get you on his side, and his delivery, I think, for me, just absolutely works, where he is riding that bike, asking for to share candy.
Yeah,
and,
he wants some of her candy.
And his introduction with Catherine Newton as they're waiting to pull off the heist of Abigail, and he's turning up the radio and just in his own world. It's just absolutely charming. And I was hoping maybe we would get to see him and Catherine Newton maybe get together at some point in there, but it wasn't meant to be. He does have a gruesome death. I love the gore there with his head falling off.
And then they reincorporate his corpse later on when she's dancing with it. It's so gross, so awful.
It's gruesome.
He actually has one of the best jump scares in the movie too, like a jump scare that is more for comedic effect, but it didn't bother me. But when Catherine Newton just turns on that old cartoon and he's just, he's just sitting in the bed back there and he just pops up, I thought that was hysterical. He is so charming in those
Yeah,
scenes.
and that is such a fun scene with him with the little bear mask. It was
He's like,
just
you can keep it. You can
yeah,
keep it. You can have it. It's like,
yeah.
what the fuck are you
And
doing?
then before his death, he squares up with a rat,
Yeah.
and because he's ready to fight. And I just absolutely love it. You can see that his death was going to be probably coming on early on, considering just so many heavy hitters in the cast.
Once he got in the kitchen, I was like, okay, you're way too alone right now. Yeah, it's never
You
a
know,
good sign.
And like for me, I wasn't expecting. I thought maybe we were building up a little bit more. I wasn't expecting a death to be happening right at that moment. But then as soon as we start hearing stuff off screen, and again, I think some of the tension here is really well done, where it's like they're kind of building, especially with Abigail going from being in the room and then getting out of the room and then kind of turning everyone on each other. Again, I think some of the script writing here was really well done.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. Which, I do have to say, Guy Busick was one of the writers on here, and we gave him and his co-writer for Scream. Who's the other writer that he works with on Scream?
Oh,
Is it
it,
James Vanderbilt? Yeah, James Vanderbilt.
yes, yep,
We give them a pretty tough shake in those films. But I went back and I looked, and I'm even double checking right now. Guy Busick has written, I think, just about everything or been a co-writer on all of the projects that Radio Silence has done.
yeah.
And I gotta say, if this is if this is the level that we're sitting at with him, then I can easily see, I'm not here to just rip down James Vanderbilt. I'm sure he's a strong writer. I'd have to look at his filmography, but I just gotta say, like, this is probably where the stronger elements from Screams 5 and 6 come from. Because again, those films are pretty mixed for us. There's elements we really like and there's elements that we don't. But like, there's a lot to like in Abigail. There's a lot more to like in Ready or Not. And like, I really think that just is a testament, again, like you said, to the writing. It's very smart. It's very quippy. And I feel like that this is kind of a little bit more, not necessarily this structure or this tone, but like this a little bit more of what I was hoping from when you talk about Radio Silence doing Scream, was a style of film like this with these nice little twists and Abigail kind of turning everybody against each other. Like, it was way more believable and way more fun in this film than it was in Scream. In Scream, it felt so telegraphed. Here, it felt natural.
Yeah, it felt like with the Scream franchise, there are those elements that do work, but overall, it feels almost like they're trying to fit into the mold of all the Scream films before it. So it's kind of sometimes with those existing properties like that, you kind of get anchored down to say, we have this idea, but it's not really fitting in with the Scream mold or Nightmare on Elm Street, whatever you want to put in there. I think I felt that as well, where you look at something so unique as a Ready or Not, and then you kind of get into those franchise films, and we were excited for Scream 5.
We were
that Radio Silence
thrilled.
finished,
Yeah.
and there are some elements in those films that do work, but overall, it doesn't feel like a full voice. Not necessarily to this extent, but like the first Omen, we had that discussion as well. Where it's like sometimes maybe too many hands in the pot to really get that voice out there to express what you want to do. And I think Abigail was certainly more that unique voice there, where it's like
there's definitely a flavor to this film
Yeah.
that you
And
don't get in those others.
And even so, like Dan Stevens' character, I could listen to that guy read me a book. It's just like the
So good.
charisma, the delivery there, the word choice. I think it all just works so well, and I think a lot of those characters there, Melissa Barrera, I will say, not necessarily overly flamboyant in terms of how strong of a personality Dan Stevens is. She's a little more muted compared to that, but I think it works so well in comparison to a lot of the flamboyant characters that we do see melding together. I think her character kind of sitting back, being again the smartest person in the room pretty much, and being able to play everyone, and then kind of understanding her background as well. You get with such a strong ensemble cast like this, where I did have my issues with kind of that long exposition there, but you do get some really compelling backstories to these characters, as well as to their motivations and things like that. It does have a lot of teeth to it, where we're really understanding the motivations of these characters. And I'm forgetting the name of the big bad. was it Christian Lazar? Maybe Christoph Lazar.
Oh,
Anyway,
yeah,
when
I'll find it.
when Abigail mentions that name and Dan Stevens gets spooked, and then
I loved
everyone
it.
gets
I
spooked,
loved
it's
it.
like, as an audience, we're playing catch up, and we don't know why we're scared, but you start feeling that tension too, especially when Dan Stevens so cool, calm, collected, gets freaked out and he's ready to head for the door. Absolutely smart writing, really gets you in your seat, really makes you feel like you're part of that cast, and you start feeling that tension that's there.
Yeah, it was definitely Dan Stevens was the highlight for me. I will say I'll talk about Melissa Barrera and some of the others first before I dive into him, and then we'll start talking a little bit more about the monstery stuff. But Melissa Barrera, I thought was excellent in this. I again, I agree with you, a little more muted than some of her castmates, but for being the vessel of the film, I mean, she is the strongest part, one of the strongest parts of the Scream films that we got recently. But I mean, for here, like the fact that she doesn't have to kind of fall into those moments of seeing her ghost father,
Yeah.
and like have kind of those tropey elements that kind of drag her out of feeling as natural. She was able to feel like a natural, heroine here, a natural lead character, and it was really enjoyable to see. I didn't necessarily feel like the elements they gave her felt all that corny to me, even though it's not really anything new with her, being kind of a drug addict who's separated from her child, and that's kind of her whole thing is she wants to get back to her son. It's nothing new, but I felt like they held it, and I think in her performance she holds it at just the right amount. Could I have went without the phone call at the end? Yeah, that felt a
Yeah.
little bit like the most we're hitting the nail on the head here, but they kind of earn it at that point because they handle it so delicately throughout it that I can forgive it. But again, I have to give her props because it's so easy for both the writer and the actor to just kind of keep circling back to, oh, I'm doing this for my kid. I'm doing this for my kid. Like I would do anything for my son. Don't get me wrong. I love it. And I know you do the same for your daughter. But like in a movie, it's like we get it. Okay. Let's keep them grounded. Let's keep them interesting, and I feel like for that kind of being her kind of thing, like everybody's kind of got a thing going on, they handled it right.
And that'll, just because you sparked it, was probably a bigger negative for me, where I understand the idea of wanting to kind of have this subtle, well, usually a subtle commentary. It seemed to me it was a little, they turned up the volume a little too much for me with the familial element there, which, Abigail's motivation is that she's getting back at a lot of people who've done wrong by her family and her father in the past, and she's kind of brought them all to this mansion to feast on them in a sense. And
Mm-hmm.
I understand that motivation there, but I was a little bit hesitant when we're first introduced to the Abigail, um, uh, Joey, which is Melissa Barrera's character, interaction, and they do the pinky promise, and it was a little over exaggerated for me. And I know that's filmmaking, when we really that's like the bulk of the shot. I'm like, okay, well, I think I would have been a little more subtle with that. And then it keeps coming back with the pinky promise, and then we get the kind of team up at the end between Abigail, Joey, taking on Dan Stevens' character. I'm forgetting what
Frank.
Frank. For me, it was just kind of this overabundance of, we have to keep recalling the familial ties here and really hammering that home, where I understand it. I think there's a subtlety in terms of, being able to pull off that in the terms of the craft, where for me, it was a little, the volume was turned up a little too much, especially, we had a discussion about it right after the theater about that team up between Abigail and Joey, which didn't really, for me, just feel as natural, where it's like, I get those. I think that was a big critique for a film that I do enjoy, Alien versus Predator, between the Predator and the humans. But the giveaway there was the young predators, where Abigail, yes, appearance is young, but she's been a vampire for a very long time. So for me, I didn't really give that much of a pass. It kind of was a little eye roller for me. Didn't lose me, but it was just kind of like, I did not want this to be kind of like the epic fight scene, that kind of how the dynamic was going to work for me.
Yeah, and there was something we talked about with that too, where at one point when Dan Stevens turns after Giancarlo Esposito, we find out he's a vampire. which I thought was a fun reveal too. I thought that it was fun that he was still there in the house. I thought that was cool.
I went into this thinking that he was the one of the main villains. Like, I thought he was on Abigail's side the whole time, and then when I was like, maybe I missed something when they had, and I don't know. I have to go back and watch that trailer. I don't know why I thought that, but I was like, I had to re-rack my brain when I realized he was the one that was, you know, in theory at the very beginning behind the heist of Abigail. So I was like, for me, I don't know what was cut in that trailer, but I had to re-rack my brain for a little bit, and then we kind of did the full circle. I was like, okay, so he is working with her. So I'm gonna have to go back and look at that trailer. But for me, it was like a moment of like, I don't know what the hell's happening.
Yeah. But I thought that that was fun. But the element that I feel like was ballsy and was really cool that they kind of shied away from and then went into the team up thing was that Dan Stevens like attacks Abigail and like gets bests her and then like starts drinking her blood. I thought they killed her.
Yeah,
There was a minute there where we all thought that she was dead, and I was like, that was intense, that was unexpected, and that was very cool. And it's like the ending isn't bad, but it does get into those. That final fight does, again, like you said, Alien versus Predator. I feel those vibes. I feel it's very formulaic in a
hmm
sense. Like they still have some fun moments. There's still some really great gore, some really great moments of
it
action there. But like
it's like your
as a whole, it lets
traditional
me
kind
go.
of,
Yeah,
fight with the big bad and everything. And I was like,
yeah.
up until that point, it was so different. It, felt like a different kind of vibe that we get from a lot of vampire films. I was hoping they weren't going to go that route. And then you see Abigail slide in and catch Joey right before she hits the ground. I was like, I
I
don't know if
rolled
this
my eyes a
works.
little bit at that
Yep.
too. Yeah, I thought that was a little goofy. But it is one of those things where I'm just kind of like, man. And then I guess since we're here, let's just talk about the other elephant in the room here with the reveal of her father, who again, I was so down to see him. He's played by the actor Matthew Goody, who does a good job with what he is. He's definitely a creepy looking vampire guy. But we said it ourselves. It kind of feels like there was supposed to be maybe a bigger name in that role. Like maybe they had floated a couple people and they couldn't get him. You and I both were really hoping for Nicolas Cage. Like just how awesome that would have been to kind of like almost tip your hat, nod at Renfield there. And just because, again, Nicolas Cage playing Dracula, it's so good. He did such a great job. And it would totally fit the tone of this movie. Not necessarily saying that Renfield has to be in the same universe as this, but his version of Dracula would definitely fit. But it just felt like it's supposed to be this big reveal and this big unexpected thing, but it just at the end of the day, it was kind of like, this is your Marvel moment, and it's one of those Marvel moments that kind of lets me down, where I'm just like, didn't need it. I think that if Abigail would have let her go, or it just would have been implied, maybe he's just a guy in the shadows or a voice, that would have been cool, because we all know that this is supposed to be Dracula. Like, this is what it's implying. This is what it is. If it's not, then I don't know where the fuck you're not getting that, because of all the art on the walls, which, again, I gotta say, the set design in this movie and all the stuff that they did, phenomenal. I thought it was all really good looking. And the way they were able to tie in little pieces of lore in through the set. But yeah, it's just one of those things where for some reason, I wanted that moment to be a little bit more impactful than it was.
Yeah, because I don't think the film needed it. By the time we get to that unveiling, and as they kind of shoehorn it in, because it does feel like that to a certain extent, that I was like expecting an actual unveiling of someone who of prominence that I'm going to absolutely recognize, and I didn't get that. I think if you're going to go that route and you're not unveiling anyone, again, Nick Cage would have been great, especially even with that. Dracula from that iteration from Renfield would have just been, I could have seen him having a cow about the mess in the library or something, just something random after this big old, all these big old deaths. But, for me, I think it would have been more subtle for me, where it's like, again, like you said, in the shadows or something, or even, opening up a car door and Abigail gets in and then we just hear a voice off screen, and, you never see an actual face. You just know that that's Dracula in there. I think would have been a little more effective, because I did spend the bulk of that scene trying to place the actor that's playing
Right? Yeah.
Dracula. and it took me out of it, where I already felt like a scene I didn't need, and now I'm splitting my attention from the dialogue that's happening, and again going into what the actor, who the actual actor is. But then, as we come to the conclusion of that, I'm like, I was already not happy with how emphasized they put that familial element to it. I was like, oh, that's the only reason they put it in there. And it's like it became another negative for me in that aspect of it, just because again, it didn't feel like we needed it. I was excited that we were gonna get someone familiar, and we didn't get that. So for me, you could have almost left that out there, just left the interaction between Abigail and Joey, and they could all walk down the steps. Hell, they could have sat on the steps and had a cigarette, like Ready or Not, if they were. But but it's just like, I don't think it needed it. It just felt like there was a missing piece there, and it just felt more underwhelming than anything. It felt like you wanted more from a bad angle rather than, I want to live in this space.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where, again, that's why I say it's their Marvel moment, because I feel like uh I can say for myself, I've been so trained by those movies to expect that kind of stuff. And I think like actors I would have put other than Nicolas Cage that could have been fun would have been like Skeet Ulrich could have been a good one, considering he's worked with Radio Silence twice.
Matthew Lillard.
Matthew Lillard was another one I thought of that I was like gonna say, yep, that would have been a fun one as well. It would have been a really fun nod to the Scream fans too, to be like, see, we're working with them. Even though I know they're not doing Scream 7, it would have been fucking great. But yeah, it's like I feel like if you just would have had anybody like just a bigger name, and it's such a short scene, it's like I couldn't imagine why they wouldn't put somebody in there. And again, I don't want to sit here and say that the actor that they had play him it was bad. Like I thought Matthew Goody was great, and I like him in other things that he's been in. He's in Watchmen. I enjoy his character there. He's definitely got a presence, but it is, again, like you said, Luke, where it's like I'm sitting there, I'm trying to place him, I'm trying to figure it out. Who just popped in my head, who would have been a fucking incredible, David Dashmalchian.
Oh my
comes
gosh.
through. Like, could you imagine? Oh my god, him playing Dracula and anything, fucking good.
And the thing is, it's like, it's not an indictment on the actual actor. It's just, it's such a small part that it's basically a cameo. So you have to have someone familiar, because you're not going to get that range of a scene that's going to be like absolutely memorable. It's just I don't know, what is it, a 2-minute scene at most, I think. Just something very small. So it's like, it, again, not an indictment on the talent. It's just there isn't much there to chew on. So it just has to be a familiar face. And David Dastmalchian, come on.
Yeah, it's such a moment of like it's a cherry on top moment, and even if you don't have your cherry on top of your sundae, you still have a sundae, and that's what this movie is. It's like, just because that moment didn't really work for us, and again the final fight feels a bit formulaic, there's still so much to love. And I mean, like I was kind of holding off on it, but Dan Stevens, dude, like he is probably my favorite piece of this walking away. He's having a hell of a year. But his character of Frank, just again, the charisma, the performance, the look of the vampires too. And I wanted to bring this up during the time I was talking about him, because I thought the sequence that absolutely sold me on him was, and I want to say it's a reference to a film we really love. It was probably very coincidental, but like, come on, man, you got to be telling me that when he has the sunglasses on and he's covered in blood, and he's sitting there smiling with his vampire teeth, even though they're different, you're telling me that that's that isn't Near Dark? Like, it's so good. Like I was so sold at that point. I loved his rendition of the vampire. I thought he was very, very he held that screen presence really well. And I thought that he was very imposing as a vampire. He felt very dangerous.
Yeah, I was waiting for that element to start, turning our characters into vampires. First, Catherine Newton's the first one to get bit.
She was great too. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
She was fucking scary. Like I thought, like she sold those smiles with the teeth. Like, horrific.
And that's where, for me, it's not a negative, but I wanted more, because you see that range where it's like all our characters as normal human beings, the camaraderie's there, the delivery's there. You love these characters. And then you look at someone like Catherine Newton, who plays a great normal person. And then when she becomes the vampire, it's absolutely terrifying. And I love the element we talked about in our non-spoilers where, Abigail's controlling her. She just got bit, so she's kind of her puppet. And I love that aspect of it. The ballerina dance, I think, works really well. Just Catherine Newton's delivery, I think, works well as a vampire. Same thing with Dan Stevens. I mean, he's probably the shining light for me as well, just because of his range and what he's able to accomplish. But, for me, I was like, as soon as they introduced the element of Catherine Newton, I was like, I hope we get some of the other cast turning as well, just to be able to see what their portrayal of a vampire is going to be. We only got Catherine Newton and we got Dan Stevens, which are great performances. I would have loved to have seen that that's an kind of part of the equation that you see in a lot of vampire flicks that I would have loved to see introduced in here, just to see our cast portrayal as vampires.
It's definitely like your big Fright Night moment, I would
Yeah.
say, because it's like you got his best friend in that film who turns. Forgive me, I'm forgetting his name, but Evil Ed, yeah. And it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, it's definitely the most Fright Night element that I could see, because like, yeah, Lost Boys, his brother turns, but like just having your friends kind of turning into vampires and shit, like it's so good. And yeah, you're right. They absolutely nailed it with those two. I would have loved to have seen Kevin Durant turn, especially because he is such this kind of dumb, hulking, imposing character throughout the film, which I got to say, I haven't really had a moment to say, my piece on him, but I loved him. I thought that he was just like he was very much like that Dave Bautista kind of role for me, where it's just like, he's just so lovable. But they really give him heart. When they first get, I kind of loved when they first abduct Abigail, and it's literally Melissa Barrera and Kevin Durant are like both, you could tell they have that like parental kind of nature to them, where they're just like, is she doing okay? How's she doing now? She's breathing fine. It's like all that, you could tell they have families, they have a little bit more going, and it just makes those characters feel more real, and I love that.
And that's what, it was such a small part, but where Melissa Barrera opens up the bag there after they have sedated Abigail, and she's like checking her pulse and her breathing, and Kevin Durant just says she's doing okay. And like, absolutely, for me, like, again, it's just part of the craft where it's a small line. A lot of people will overlook it, but it makes you feel something. You know what I mean? It makes you feel like that care is there, that everything's okay, even though they're pulling off this heist. And I absolutely love those elements to it. Kevin Durant, I didn't know what to expect from that performance. I've seen him in a handful of things, but like, for him to be such a focal point, I absolutely loved it, because I was not expecting that. I thought he was going to kind of have those more so Angus Cloud elements where he's probably going to be gone in the front half of the film, but he lasted for a way longer time than I thought he was going to.
I really expected, like, looking into this film, like as we're assembling our cast, I expected him and William Catlett, who plays Rickles, who I also thought was great. He's not in the film very much. I thought he was. I liked his character a lot, of just how he,
another subtle performance.
Yeah,
it really works
when him and Melissa Barrera's character kind of have that talk privately, and then you hear that like they're both military and they have that kind of meetup. It's like it got me excited, and then they fucking kill him right away.
And that
it's
gore
like,
in his
death. It's gruesome.
Yeah,
and it was unexpected.
Yeah,
I only started to expect it because we were lingering for so long, and I was like, oh no. But like, no, I thought that if anybody, it was going to be him and Kevin Durant to go first. But the fact that they were able to just switch it up on us and everything, like, I thought that was really well done. And again, that's like another really strong piece of the writing here and the directing from the Radio Silence crew here. And then I think we would be totally remiss if we didn't at least talk about Alicia Weir in this spoiler review. We highlighted her big in our spoiler-free review, but I mean, for being such a young actress, for having a role like this where it's demanding, you have to not only do a bunch of stunts and have to be a monster, a vampire, you have to play both the element of a scared little girl, but also a scared little girl who's not actually a scared little girl. You're a 500, 400 million year old vampire, however old she is, and you're basically playing it up to these people. I thought she did a great job. I genuinely think that, with time, she could be one of those actresses that, 10 years time, when she's like in her mid-20s, we could be seeing her, if she sticks to this, really landing some big meaty roles. Because like if she's showing that range right now at the age that she's at, like Jesus, she's gonna be a powerhouse when she gets older.
Yeah, and there are those elements in there where Abigail's kind of playing, Joey and Frank against each other, saying that, Frank said that he's been working for
Hmm.
her father and everything. And as these killings are going on, and I gotta be honest, her performance was so strong that, and again, going into knowing the premise, and, you know,
Yeah.
Dan Stevens goes in there, and I'm like, there's no one else in the house, right? Like, I'm not missing
Yeah,
something,
I
It's
also
like,
thought maybe there was too for a
yeah.
second.
So it's like, she had me believing, even though I knew the premise of the entire film itself. I think the delivery was just so well done in those moments between her and Joey before we see that transformation for Abigail. It's like, what's coming, but I didn't want her to be my villain. You know what I mean? It's like,
Yeah,
I was so on board
and
with her being this
the
kidnapped girl in the bed.
and the thing that kind of sells that too is because like we were pointing things out. I pointed out to you in the movie that I thought that I saw like coffins in one of the
Yes.
rooms, which we
Yep.
maybe did, but like it's one of those things where it was like, if she was playing the scared little girl who was a vampire, we know that, so she's kind of playing into it. But there easily could have been another element to this where we had brought it up off air, where this was like a vampire den in a
Yep.
sense, and there's more of them, because there was a lot of From Dusk Till Dawn comparisons also from early screenings. And it's one of those elements where it's like having that in my head, which we'll talk about at the end here. It was one of those things where I expected that, I think, and it didn't happen, but it is one of those elements where, yeah, it did make me believe that, okay, maybe there is something else here. There's another character, another vampire. I didn't think it was a hitman, but like they were all thinking, but it was like there could be another monster in this movie.
Yeah, no, I this did open up for, it was a lot of fun. I think it did open up for even more creativity that, you could have easily capitalized on. I would have loved it, would have made zero sense, but a dismembered Angus Cloud's head as a vampire would have just been delivering lines would have just been hilariously fun. But that's the tone of this film, where it's like it could have went anywhere, and I think it really does knock that out of the park. We wanted a fun vampire flick. I think we did get a fun vampire flick here. Is it Lost Boys? Not necessarily, but again, this is so modern. Lost Boys has been able to sit for decades upon decades. Where this one, I think we have to remove ourselves a little farther before we can kind of, say, is this something I'm going to consistently revisit? But I got to be honest, from a cast perspective, from a gore perspective, just from, that little nugget of an idea of being a ballerina and becoming a vampire and being kidnapped by a bunch of seedy characters and then turning the tables is a fun element, especially when you haven't seen other things like that. So I got to say, this was, with the state of, I guess, how vampire flicks have been over the past few years, I gotta say this is a big win.
I agree. Yeah, this was definitely, we said it in our spoiler-free review, and we'll say it again here. This was a huge win as far as vampire films go, I would say. I mean, we really enjoyed The Last Voyage of the Demeter. I
Yes,
thought that was also a strong win. Not many people went and embraced that film, but it seems like a
unfortunately
lot
not.
of people are embracing this,
Yep.
which is great to see. But again, I think that just comes down to flavor and taste. I think that a lot of audiences are looking for vampire movies that do kind of fall into that Dusk Till Dawn, Lost Boys, Fright Night category, where it's a little more modern, it's a little bit more, just regular people in a tough situation, as opposed to like our, kind of Victorian era
Yeah.
style vampire film,
Eerie
which,
piece.
yeah, which we'll see. Nosferatu, I think, is going to be a game changer for that, hopefully. But I think like it is one of those things where it's tough when you do vampire movies nowadays, especially because we're living in that post Twilight, post Vampire Diaries world where we had all this stuff like True Blood. They were everywhere. They were just like the zombies, where it's like zombies got so overdone that you're looking for something fresh. So when you find something like A Train to Busan and it does something different with zombies, it's like, oh, this is exciting. This is cool. This is the same thing where it's like, it may not be as surprising as Train to Busan, but it's one of those things where it's like, this is exciting and fun. And, I just enjoyed my time with this more than I thought I was going to. There's a couple little things I wrote down here that I did want to mention before we completely wrap up. But one of my gripes that I was working with our buddy Jake, Killjoy Jake, on a little project he's working on yesterday. So I was out late with him. We started talking about this, and it was an element that I was saved for this, but he also agreed, and I think you will too. Why were they constantly splitting up? Why are you in this situation, especially after they find out that it's a vampire? Why are they all splitting up in the house? Like that was
They had to
bothering me
find her.
throughout
Come
the
on.
film. Yeah, I know.
No, I'm
I
kidding.
can forgive it, but it's like to an
It,
extent because there's so many times, especially as their numbers start dropping, where it's like, why are you still splitting up? Stay together. What are you
it,
doing?
and it's such a, a basic tool to build tension
I
that it's just
know.
like, for me, it's like, it's one of those things where it's it's almost a nitpick in every film. You know what I mean? So it
Mhm.
almost does not make my list anymore unless it's something completely egregious, where it's just like, nah, they just do it for the storytelling perspective, which I totally understand. It's like, it gets annoying, but even when Scary Movie comments on it, and it's like, we're still doing it. It just, I guess it's
It,
Hollywood screenwriting.
yeah, because it's like there's just the elements of like the characters just feel smarter than that
Yeah,
at points, and it's like sometimes they don't, but like especially once they know what they're up against, it's like, why are you doing that? So it bothered me a little bit. I had to comment on it because he also, as we were discussing it yesterday, had the same gripe. But like, I think that will bug some people. But again, that's not game. That's not going to ruin the movie.
yeah,
That doesn't ruin anything. I also thought there was a little bit of something you don't catch it right away. I didn't until afterwards when I saw a post about it. But Dan Stevens' character's real name is Adam Barrett, which, if you know anything of his work and kind of where he came from, and Radio Silence, as far as like their buddies in Hollywood, that is a direct reference to director Adam Wingard and writer Simon Barrett, who also did like Your Next and The Guest. And most recently, they've teamed up again for Godzilla versus Kong, or Godzilla X Kong, which also has Dan Stevens in it. So that was a nice little wink and a nod to their friends there. And yeah, I just thought that overall, I think that Abigail is a super fun film. Again, more than I bargained for going into it. And definitely something that I do see myself picking up on 4K, hopefully. Again, I think it's a very beautifully shot movie. I love the sets and the structure and the color. I know Evan from Rockland Graves in his review claimed that this would be a great Halloween time film, and I gotta agree with him. I think like that this would be a nice one to throw on right on the early months of Halloween, and just throw on and have a fun time with it. But again, you could watch this any time of year, and I think that's the fun part about it. It's like that Lost Boys thing where it's like I can throw that movie on any time of the year. And again, that's not to say that it's the quality of those films. Like I think you said it best when you said only time will tell. But for me, I really did enjoy myself with Abigail.
yeah. This is something that I'm gonna be picking up physically. I want it on the shelf. I'll probably revisit it a few times over, the year, and most certainly will be in my October rotation. I don't know if it'll be on the actual day of Halloween, but I cannot wait for that cold breeze in the air. Put it on the hoodie. The leaves are changing, and I am putting on Abigail to watch in the evening. So, this one is a buttload of fun. From an acting perspective, I think there's a lot to just sit here and witness some greatness. A lot of great gore, some great kills, and great performances. So I think this is a wonderful addition into the vampire genre. Certainly over the past 5 years, where we've been in a bit of a drought. Where you think you're gonna be hitting some gold, and it just never really turns out to be fool's gold, I guess. But we never really got that. I think this one here is something you should go out and see. It's something that I think you should own because it's not going to disappoint.
I agree. I definitely am looking forward to picking it up. And I got to say, right now, currently, I'm not going to rank all their films, but it's easily right now my second favorite Radio Silence film. I think Ready or Not still holds that top space for me because, again, that film is just so fresh and exciting. And we'll see how the sequel pans out, I guess. But This is definitely for me their best work since that, and I gotta say I really hope that they continue down this path of doing these original, fresh stories. Just keep doing your own stuff. I feel like maybe it was just Scream. I'm not saying they don't have to do franchises because I think like they're a strong enough team and they've proven themselves enough to do stuff. But like I just love their original stuff so much more, and that's what Abigail did. It cemented that for me, where it's like this is so much more what I like from this group of filmmakers, rather than trying to take what I like about them and applying it to a formulaic franchise.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. I like their original properties much more. I'm sitting right there with you. I believe, I haven't seen Ready or Not probably in over a year, but I was so happy with them when I watched it, a handful of times, and it was an exciting film. So I think, Abigail is certainly a close second. I've only seen it one time, so once I pick it up, and get a couple rewatches under my belt, I don't know, that could change. But
Yeah.
I gotta say, in comparison to the Scream franchise, I think Radio Silence and Scream on paper is a great fit with the way they write, some of the comedic elements that they do introduce. But I think there was some sort of a mismatch there where I think there are great elements in both Scream films, but they're just not a complete film. It falls apart, especially when you get to those unveilings. It feels like a Scream
uninspired.
movie.
It's just like, and that's just not. Again, we talk about the third act with the fight being a little bit uninspired here, but like it's not to the level of like that Scream reveal, because like you expect from a team like this, they're really going to think outside of the box and do something exciting with it. They do a lot of outside of the box and exciting things in this movie. So it's like, I don't know what happened with those Scream movies. I don't know why they just felt so blah when the reveal was like, really, that's who you fucking choose? It's like, come on, man.
Yeah, and that's where it's like, I guess we'll never know necessarily what goes on behind the scenes. It could have been just one of those, we have to do this, we have to do that. I guess we'll never know. But, that's kind of the direction that I go in when you see something like Ready or Not and Abigail, as opposed to some of the Scream things. And that's being such an established IP out there that, we have to do this. You have to hit those specific points. It's really the only thing I can kind of deduce and come up with. But, this one, definitely go check it out. If you weren't a fan of the Scream films, don't let this put a sour taste in your mouth. If you thought that the trailer was generic, don't let that put a sour taste in your mouth. This is something
definitely not.
Yeah, this is something, it's a great addition. They bring in some fun lore here and just great storytelling. So this is a win for vampire flicks, a win for Radio Silence. Definitely go check this one out.
I agree. But alrighty, guys, that's going to wrap us up here for Abigail. We shot for 30 minutes, and we're sitting at 51. So, hey, lots to say.
We love to give you extra content.
Hey, it is what it is. But hopefully, if you've made it this far, number one, we thank you for watching. And to definitely let us know down below, if you haven't already, what are some of your favorite moments from Abigail? What are some of the moments that may have let you down? And where does this sit for you on the Radio Silence roster, as well as just how you feel about it as kind of being a great modern vampire flick? Is this something that you could see really cementing itself? In 5 years' time, people will look back and say, hey, that is one of the best modern vampire movies to date. And are you guys looking forward to Nosferatu? I know different style of film, but hey, it's another big vampire flick we're getting. And of course, how you feeling about Last Voyage of the Demeter? If you haven't seen it, I recommend it. Check it out. A little different than this, but totally underrated. Luke and I really like that movie. So, alrighty, guys. Other than that, we got a lot of great stuff up on the channel and a lot more to come. So until next time, I am Dylan Newell.
And I'm Luke Janesco.
And remember, stay scared.
Do the hard shit, gonna do it live. Cause Splattercast kick it every day they live. Splattercast, Splattercast,